Good morning to you. It's 6:42. Let's have a look at the papers for you this morning. We'll start. The Telegraph has the Home Secretary's calls for police to investigate every theft.
The Times opens with the Home Office's electric tagging plan to stop migrants from fleeing.
Great British food scandal is on the front of the Mirror, with half of the food in our diets apparently linked to heart attacks and strokes.
Andrew back in the fold, says The Sun. It's got a picture of the Prince travelling to church with William and Kate. Catherine.
Oh, it's Catherine.
I was going for Catherine and we just ended up on Cat.
Yeah. I thought they didn't all get on. No, she wouldn't like Cat. No, it's not
She wouldn't like that at all.
And Happy Monday, says the Daily Star. Are we set for an Indian summer? Well, the forecasters say no, don't they? They all say no Indian summer.
But we say yes, please.
We say yes. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
But it's technically, what is an Indian summer? It's something quite technical. It's not just being a bit warm now or in September.
Because I asked Nathan Rao about this once.
Yes, you did.
He said I was all very wrong.
Yes.
It's October, I think, is an Indian summer, so that's not going to happen in this country, unfortunately.
No, it isn't. Let's take you through the papers then in a little bit more detail with former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall and the writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Claire, let's kick off with the Telegraph, should we?
Yeah.
Every theft must be investigated, says the Home Secretary.
Which is a great headline.
Yeah.
I think everybody would get behind that and they would say, yes, we want every theft to be looked at, but we don't have the number of police officers that we require to look at every single theft, whether it be a car, a mobile phone, a laptop, a bicycle. What are we going to do? And you kind of think, is this just grabbing the headlines? Well, the Daily Telegraph have put it on their front page, but how does it work in practice? Do we have enough police officers to actually go to every individual who has suffered a theft and look at footage and go out there and interview suspects and all the rest of it? And you think, is that then going to have an impact on other areas of crime, such as rape, sexual assaults, murders? Are you going to suffer in that area? Because if you don't have enough officers, something's got to have to give somewhere along the line.
But we have recruited more officers, haven't we?
We have recruited more officers, but we are still below what we would need to be able to enact this kind of policy. I mean, I think it's a little bit unfair on the police service as a whole to hold them fully responsible for investigating every single crime.
But she's put a caveat in, though, hasn't she?
She has,
so with a reasonable line of inquiry.
Exactly, and you can see that those kind of words are going to be used as a defence for why they haven't looked into a mobile phone theft, for example. And I do find it frustrating when somebody has had a phone stolen or a bicycle stolen and they've gone to the trouble of tracking it and they know where it is and they give the police all of the details that they have, that they could then reasonably chase that up, and the police say, there isn't enough evidence. And I think that's really frustrating. So I think it does need to be ironed out a little bit more. I think it's unreasonable to expect them, with the resources they have, to go to this kind of length, but we do need to do something, and I think that something is recruit and train more police officers.
What do you make of it, Candice?
Yeah, well, they say they're going to do fewer mental health checks, and apparently that's been pioneered in Humberside, so you have the sort of right care, right person scheme, and they said that does free up a lot more time. So the NHS takes care of people in mental distress more, and then police have more time to investigate certain crimes. And obviously something does need to change, because I think faith in the police has been damaged by crimes that people most commonly experience, these so-called low-level crimes, and they're not being solved. I mean, there obviously is there's practicalities in it as well.
It's not even being solved, though, is it? It's the fact they've just it's looking into it.
Yeah.
Which would be half the battle.
Yes, and like Claire said, people actually end up investigating it themselves. Sometimes you might find your bike that's stolen on Facebook, and you'll see it's for sale, and you'll be able to track down where it is. I mean, even in my community, we've resolved issues on our own. We've had no choice. And so that's what's going on. And I think that will keep going on more and more as people just think, well, there's no point even reporting it to the police.
Well, and yeah, which is where things really start to fall apart.
Yes.
OK, Candice, let's have a look at the front page of The Times, shall we? An electronic tagging plan to stop migrants from fleeing.
I know. So apparently, because so this is front page of The Times, because the backlog has just ballooned, and I mean, it's gone up apparently by about 175,000 people waiting to get their asylum claims processed. They're now looking at ways to keep track of migrants who disappear. And they're looking at tagging as one possible way of doing that. And obviously human rights groups don't like that. They say they're not criminals. But it just shows just how unwieldy this whole system is becoming. You're now looking at like highly punitive measures to track people. I mean, Rishi Sunak has said that they want to get on top of that this year, but clearly they're not. I mean, it's ballooned to about $4 billion a year in costs as well.
Yeah. But they're not criminals, no. But however, they're not people with the right to roam freely in this country, are they?
Yeah, no, they're not. I mean, it is illegal migration. But the problem is so this illegal migration act, it can't go ahead until they can figure out when they can start sending people to Rwanda. And that's still being tied up with, obviously, international courts, and they don't know if they'll be able to do it. So all the plans that they want to enact to sort of manage incentives in terms of deterring people from coming here in the first place, they can't do it. And so I feel like the conversation around this is just getting more and more extreme. So they're talking about tagging, they're talking about physically pushing the boats back, because all the legal routes that they want to go down, they can't.
Yeah. But I mean, Claire, for local communities, I mean, when we're looking at the Bibi Stockholm, I mean, a lot of what the community talks about is this fear about, especially men on places like the Bibi Stockholm, absconding or getting out into the local community or committing even petty crime. That's a lot of where this fear comes from. Something like this might help to tackle that.
It might. They aren't criminals, no. To detain them would be wrong. We can't do that. I think there are some benefits. I think perhaps communities would feel that this was a solution being offered up. But also, when you read down into the detail in the article, it says that there aren't actually enough electronic tags out there at the moment to be able to deal with it. And who's going to monitor it? And my concern is that this is now another private contract that gets handed out to a company who doesn't necessarily do that. And we've seen this with companies that deal with prisoners and escorting them to and from courts, and the electronic tagging system, where it falls down really, really badly. So I think that it's an idea. I think communities will probably welcome it in areas that do have concerns. But it does it makes you wonder what they are going to do. What are you going to do if somebody report somebody who's got an electronic tag, they're not actually doing anything wrong? Well, what do you want to do with this?
It'd be geo-tagging, wouldn't it? So you sort of say, well, you can't, you've got a 10-mile perimeter. You can go, you don't go out the town or whatever, and if you went out, then it'll...
And the majority of them don't. They don't have anywhere to go, and I think this is largely the problem. We're putting people in an area where there isn't anything for them to do. If they're going to go into a local town, for whatever reason, most of the time doing absolutely nothing wrong, you're tagging people, you're tracking them. I mean, there are arguments on both sides. I mean, my argument on this one is going to be the cost factor and what the effectiveness is going to be.
Well, yeah, you need it to be effective.
Yes.
In the Express, Claire, senior MPs are warning that Tory infighting will gift Labour the keys to number 10. Blimmin' heck, have they elected Sherlock Holmes?
Wow.
To work this one out?
I mean, who'd have thought it?
I know.
Really, who'd have thought this would ever happen? Divided parties don't win elections, and I've said that enormously lots of times, and I can't ever imagine a sign of weakness that we've got at the moment. We have such a divided party in the Conservatives. There are so many different factions. Everybody gets told to pull together. Nobody does. And I don't think Nadine Dorries has helped. The psychodrama of this weekend with Nadine Dorries and her resignation letter, which apparently did not actually go to the Prime Minister who it was addressed to, but into a newspaper column instead, where he read it for the first time. I think that it's so obvious that the infighting has to stop, but unfortunately I think we are past the point of that happening. I can't see it happening. The factions are now too entrenched in their own decisions, and it doesn't matter who is saying it. It's not going to change.
So they're going to lose, then?
Do you know, I think it's almost inevitable, because you get to this point in the electoral cycle where you are 13 years on the public are saying, well, what ideas do you have? The party is saying, well, we'd like to do this, and they U-turn on it, or part of their own party says, no, that's a really bad idea, you need to do this. And the public just says, do you know what? We'd like a coherent strategy to come forward.
It's so interesting you say that, because that's the feeling that I get as well. And a lot of the Westminster journalists who I speak to say that it feels like the party, they're exhausted. And they're sort of running out of ideas, and they're feeling just very frayed and fragmented. Whereas I don't know if Labour do have ideas. I don't feel like they're a coherent force either. I feel like politics as a whole is very exhausted and sort of struggling to find its way.
But it's the whole thing, isn't it, that parties don't win elections, governments lose them.
Yeah, that's true. And a divided house cannot stand.
Yeah. Candice, can we have a look at this? Because this, I can't get my head around this. It's in The Sun and several other papers as well, about Prince Andrew back in the fold. It's pictures with William and Catherine.
I know, it's like people are trying to read the signs about the royal family. So the royal family all gathered in Balmoral this weekend, and Prince Andrew was photographed with them, which is meant to apparently, you know, signify that perhaps he's being welcomed back in and he's not as disgraced as he was, because you saw the scenes from the coronation. I mean, you know, I even felt a sliver of sympathy for him. He walked in and he just looked so embarrassed. He looked so alone, and it was clear he was very much on the outs.
I don't know why we have a picture of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth on that. She wasn't there, regret to say, at church.
Yes.
But
so what's going to happen with him now? I mean, is there any way back for him? I mean, I suppose he can't really have any public role right now, although the family may wish to bring him back in, I mean, for personal reasons.
I mean, can you imagine a public role? I mean, he'd be pelted with tomatoes.
Yes, he is. I mean, you know, that whole thing, I mean, it's still very shrouded in mystery. He's obviously just hidden from it and shrunk from it. But there's still many questions that need to be answered.
But it is on the front page of many of the papers this morning, isn't it? I mean, this has clearly captured the imagination of the British people. Claire, what do you make of it?
I think this is a man just travelling to church with his family. I don't think this is necessarily a rehabilitation. I think perhaps we're reading a little bit too much into this. He will never have another public role, and I think that's made abundantly clear. But to join his family at a church service, I'm not sure why we're getting so excited about that, because surely that is a matter for them. If they are going to church and they want him to come along and he wants to go along, why don't we just leave them to that decision? It's not as if they've asked him to go out there and speak on behalf of the royal family or to take up some kind of public engagement. I think that we always look at these things as something more than it actually is.
I think
that's a shame.
That may be, actually, Claire, a very good point.
Just going to church.
They must have known they'd be pictured, that's the thing.
Of course, but then if he hid round a corner and sort of went in under a big coat, then that would be photographed and then that would be talked about and that would be wrong. So I think whatever they do is going to draw attention to the family, draw attention to themselves, and we're all going to fill a vacuum.
Yeah, fair point. Claire, Candice, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on.
Thank you. Now let's get your weather forecast with Craig Snell.